I always believed in loyalty. I mean, isn't that what a marriage is all about? My wife Melissa and I had been together for years, and I thought we were solid. We were the kind of couple that people looked at and assumed we'd last forever. I had dreams of growing old together, seeing our children grow up, and sharing those quiet moments that only two people who've been through everything together can understand. I remember feeling proud to have a partner like her, someone who shared my values. I used to tell myself that there are still good, loyal women out there, and Melissa was one of them. I trusted her completely. Sure, there were times when I worried like anyone does. You know, those thoughts that creep in late at night, those little whispers that ask, "What if?" But I'd shake them off. I doubted it could ever happen to me. Melissa wouldn't do that. She was my best friend, and I was certain we were on the same page. Deep down, though, there were fears I never really talked about. Fears about losing her, about not being enough. I had always struggled a bit with not having as much money or status as some of the people around us. I used to think that maybe if I could just be more successful, then everything would be even better. I wanted to give Melissa everything, but sometimes I felt like I wasn't quite there. And yet, despite all the insecurities, I believed in our love. I believed in the idea that if you put your heart into something, if you were honest and loyal, then things would work out. Melissa and I had our ups and downs, like any couple, but I always thought we were on the right track. I never thought my fears would become my reality. I doubted she could ever betray me, and maybe that was my biggest mistake, trusting too completely without ever questioning. It was a regular weekday when everything started to unravel. I remember it so vividly because it was one of those days when everything just seemed normal, until it wasn't. I was at home when my neighbor Mark stopped by. We'd always been on friendly terms, casual conversations over the fence, nothing too deep. That day, though, there was something different in his voice, a hesitation that made me uneasy. He looked at me in that way someone does when they're about to tell you something you don't want to hear. He said he needed to talk to me about Melissa. My stomach tightened. He fumbled for words, and that's when he told me he'd seen her more than once with someone else. Not just any meeting, but in a way that made it clear this wasn't innocent. He was careful with his words, but the message was unmistakable. Melissa was seeing another man. I stood there, trying to process what he was saying, but my mind just couldn't wrap around it. I wanted to interrupt, to tell him he must be mistaken, that there was no way Melissa would do that. Not her, not my Melissa. But the look in Mark's eyes said he wasn't lying. He didn't want to hurt me. I could see that. He was only telling me because he thought I deserved to know. I remember nodding, hearing myself thank him, but it was like my voice belonged to someone else. Everything felt distant. My ears were ringing, and all I could think was, this isn't real. This can't be happening. I closed the door after Mark left, and for a moment, I just stood there in the silence of my house. I wanted to believe it was some kind of misunderstanding, that he had somehow got it all wrong. But deep inside, a part of me knew that things had changed, that something was broken now, even if I couldn't quite see it yet. After Mark left, I tried to brush it off. I told myself that he must have been mistaken, that there was no way Melissa would do this to me, to us. But the thing about doubt is that once it creeps in, it grows. No matter how hard I tried to ignore it, that gnawing feeling wouldn't leave me alone. Every little thing Melissa did suddenly seemed suspicious. Every late meeting, every time she said she was going out with friends. I wanted to believe her, but that seed of doubt was growing faster than I could control. I started paying more attention. I'd watch her when she was on her phone, noticing if she smiled at a message or stepped into another room to take a call. I remember one night she got home late, saying she'd been catching up with an old friend. I smiled, nodded, and told her I hoped she had fun. But inside, I felt a pang of something I couldn't ignore. Something that felt a lot like betrayal, or at least the fear of it. I even started checking her social media, looking for clues, something to either confirm or refute what Mark had said. I hated myself for it. I felt like a spy in my own life, and I kept asking myself, "What are you doing? You're supposed to trust her." But I couldn't stop. It was like I needed to know, one way or another, and the not knowing was eating me alive. One evening, while Melissa was in the shower, I did something I never thought I'd do. I picked up her phone. My hands were shaking, and my heart was pounding as I scrolled through her messages. There it was, a name I didn't recognize, and a series of messages that were just vague enough to confirm my worst fears. My head felt like it was underwater, my vision blurring, as I stared at the screen. There was no mistaking it now. Mark had been right, and there it was, the truth staring me in the face, and all I felt was emptiness. I knew I couldn't keep it inside any longer. The truth was there, undeniable, and it was eating me alive. I had to confront Melissa. I needed answers, something, anything that could make sense of what was happening. So one evening, after dinner, I just said it. I looked at her and asked, "Melissa, is there something you need to tell me?" She looked up, startled, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes, a flicker of fear or guilt. I couldn't quite tell. She tried to act confused, asking what I meant, but I pressed on. I told her about what Mark had said, about what I had seen on her phone. Her face changed, and she looked away, her hands trembling slightly. I could see it then, the truth she had been trying to hide. She didn't deny it. Instead, she just sighed, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders, and she said, "I'm sorry, David," just like that. No long explanations, no excuses, just a simple apology that felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I remember feeling this strange combination of anger, sadness, and numbness all at once. I wanted to yell, to scream, to ask her why, but the words wouldn't come. All I could say was, "Why, Melissa? How could you?" She looked at me, tears welling up, but her eyes were distant, like she was already somewhere else. She said she hadn't been happy, that she felt disconnected, and she didn't know how to tell me. I listened, but none of it made sense. We'd had our problems, sure, but I never imagined it would come to this. I wanted to understand, but all I felt was broken. The person I had trusted more than anyone had betrayed me, and there was nothing she could say that would make it right. I stood up, walked away, and left her sitting there in the kitchen, crying. And as I walked out of the room, I realized that whatever we had, whatever I believed we were, it was gone. After that night, I felt like I'd lost a part of myself. I used to think I was a good husband, loyal, supportive, doing everything I could to be there for Melissa. But after finding out about the affair, all I could see were my failures. I kept replaying every argument, every moment I might have missed something. It was like my mind was on a loop, pointing out everything I'd done wrong. I started asking myself, was I not enough? Was it because I wasn't successful enough, or didn't make enough money? I kept blaming myself for all the things I thought I lacked. It wasn't just about Melissa's betrayal, it was what it did to how I saw myself. I felt small, inadequate. Every day, I woke up with that sinking feeling in my chest, like I had failed at the most important thing in my life. I'd look in the mirror, and all I'd see was a man who wasn't good enough to keep his wife. I started avoiding friends, making excuses not to see people because I was embarrassed. I didn't want to explain why Melissa wasn't around anymore or why I looked so tired all the time. I couldn't handle the pity. Work became unbearable too. I couldn't focus on anything. Every task seemed pointless. My colleagues would ask if I was okay, and I'd just nod, pretending everything was fine. But inside, I was falling apart. The worst part was the nights. The silence of the house was deafening, and I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't escape. I'd think about the other man. What did he have that I didn't? What made him better? I'd wonder if Melissa had ever felt proud of me, or if she had always thought she could do better. I felt like I'd lost control of my own life. Even the things I used to enjoy didn't make sense anymore. I tried going to the gym, thinking maybe exercise would help, but every time I looked around, I felt like I was surrounded by people who had their lives together, people who didn't have to deal with the kind of mess I was in. I couldn't shake the feeling of being broken, like I was less of a man because I couldn't keep my marriage from falling apart. And the more I thought about it, the deeper I sank into that dark place, where every mistake, every shortcoming was magnified. I think that was the hardest part, not just losing Melissa, but losing the person I thought I was. The confidence I once had felt shattered, replaced by this hollow version of myself that I barely recognized. And the worst part was, I didn't know how to fix it, or if I ever could. Eventually, I knew I had to face Melissa again. We couldn't just avoid each other forever, and there were still so many things I needed to understand. I needed answers, even if I wasn't sure I wanted to hear them. So one evening, I asked her to sit down with me. It wasn't like before, when I confronted her out of pure shock. This time, I wanted to get to the bottom of why everything had fallen apart. I asked her how long it had been going on, and why. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it was hard. My hands were shaking, and I could feel my chest tightening. She looked at me, and there was a sadness in her eyes, maybe even regret. She told me it had started months ago, that she had felt lonely, disconnected. She said she didn't feel like we were on the same page anymore, that she felt like I was distant. Hearing her say that hurt. I wanted to argue, to tell her that I was there, that I had always been there, but a part of me wondered if maybe I had missed something, if I hadn't seen the signs. As she spoke, all I could think was, how did we get here? I had loved her, trusted her, and now it felt like I was sitting across from a stranger. I asked her if she loved him. She hesitated, then shook her head. But the hesitation was enough. It was like a knife to my heart. I realized then that it didn't really matter what she said. The damage was done, and there was no going back to how things used to be. I tried to stay calm, but my voice cracked when I asked her why she didn't just talk to me, why she didn't give me a chance to fix things before it got to this point. She didn't have an answer that made any of it better. She just said she was sorry, that she never meant to hurt me, but it all felt empty. I wanted to believe her, but the truth was, her actions had already spoken louder than any apology could. When I walked away that night, I knew it was over. There was no fixing what was broken between us. I wasn't even sure who Melissa was anymore, and maybe I never really knew. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living like this, clinging to something that was already gone. After that conversation with Melissa, I felt like I was unraveling. The reality of everything hit me all at once, and I had no idea how to handle it. I'd get up in the morning, go through the motions, but it was like I was watching someone else live my life. The world kept moving forward, but I was stuck in this fog, unable to think clearly, unable to feel anything but pain. It wasn't just sadness. It was an emptiness that seemed to swallow everything good in my life. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of what I'd lost. The pictures on the wall, the little things Melissa had left behind, they all felt like ghosts of the life we had, the life I thought we would keep building. I couldn't even sit in the living room without feeling this crushing sense of loss. Every moment we'd spent together seemed like a lie now, and that realization tore me apart. The dreams I'd had for us, the future I'd imagined, had been ripped away, and I was left with nothing but shattered pieces. Nights were the worst. Lying in bed alone, with nothing but my thoughts, I'd replay every single moment in my head, wondering if I could have done something differently, if I could have somehow prevented all of this. I'd think about how things used to be, the laughter, the good times, and I'd feel this ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. I couldn't understand how someone who was such a big part of my life could just be gone, like she never really cared. It felt like I didn't know her at all. I'd find myself staring at my phone, tempted to call her, to hear her voice, to ask her why again. But I knew that wouldn't help. It would only make things worse. The urge to reach out, to try and make sense of it all, was overwhelming. But I had to stop myself. It was like I was addicted to the pain, as if holding on to it was the only way to keep a connection to her, even though I knew it was toxic. Sometimes I'd get angry. Angry at Melissa for betraying me, angry at myself for not seeing it coming, for not being enough. I'd go from tears to rage, and then back to numbness, all within a single day. I felt like I was on an emotional roller coaster I couldn't get off of. I couldn't talk to anyone about it either. Not really. I didn't want to burden my friends with all my pain. They'd ask if I was okay, and I'd lie, tell them I was managing, but I wasn't. I was drowning, and I didn't know how to save myself. The world kept turning, and I felt like I was being left behind, stuck in the heartbreak. I didn't know if I'd ever feel normal again, if I'd ever be able to trust someone, or even myself. It felt like everything I believed in, everything I hoped for, had been destroyed, and I had no idea how to rebuild. I was just trying to survive each day, one moment at a time, hoping that somehow, someday, the pain would start to fade. After everything, I found myself facing a question I never imagined I'd have to answer. Should I stay and try to work things out with Melissa? Or should I leave? It wasn't as simple as just walking away. Part of me still loved her, or at least the version of her I thought I knew. I wanted to believe that we could fix it, that maybe if we tried hard enough, we could find a way back to what we used to have. There were moments when I thought about all the years we spent together, the memories we'd made, and it felt impossible to just let all of that go. But the other part of me knew it was already over. The trust was gone, and without trust, what was left? Every time I looked at Melissa, all I could think about was the betrayal, the lies. I'd wonder if she still loved me, or if she was just staying out of guilt, or because she was afraid to be alone. And I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how much we tried, things would never be the same. I'd always be questioning her, always be suspicious, and that's no way to live. I remember sitting alone one night, trying to weigh it all out. On one hand, there was comfort in staying, comfort in the familiarity, in not having to face the uncertainty of being alone. On the other hand, there was this constant pain, this gnawing feeling that I was betraying myself by staying with someone who had broken my heart so completely. I wanted to hold on to the good memories, but they were being overshadowed by everything that had happened. I knew I deserved better, but it was hard to accept that the future I dreamed of with Melissa was never going to happen. In the end, I realized that I couldn't keep living in this limbo. I couldn't keep pretending that things would get better if we just tried harder. I needed to let go, not just for my own sake, but for both of us. Staying would only mean dragging out the pain, holding on to something that was already broken, beyond repair. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but I knew it was the right one. I had to leave, even if it meant facing the unknown, because I couldn't keep living in a relationship built on lies and betrayal. After I made the decision to leave, there was a strange emptiness that settled in. I thought it might feel liberating to walk away, but instead, it just felt quiet, too quiet. The house was almost unbearably still without Melissa there. I moved my things into a smaller place, and it was just me and my thoughts. I tried to keep myself busy, but the silence was suffocating. I didn't really want to talk to anyone. I felt like I had nothing to say that anyone would want to hear. I avoided my friends. I knew they cared, and they tried to reach out, but I couldn't bring myself to pick up the phone. I just felt embarrassed. Embarrassed that my marriage had fallen apart. Embarrassed that I couldn't make it work, even though it wasn't my fault. I hated the idea of people feeling sorry for me. So instead, I just stayed away. I spent my weekends alone, trying to fill the time with things that used to make me happy. Watching old movies, reading books, even cooking. But nothing really felt the same anymore. I remember one Saturday, I tried going out to a bar, thinking maybe being around people would help. I sat there, nursing a drink, watching groups of friends laugh and couples lean into each other, and I felt like an outsider, like I didn't belong anymore. The loneliness I felt was overwhelming, and I ended up leaving after just half an hour. I thought maybe I needed to try something else, so I signed up for the gym again, figuring exercise might help me clear my mind. But even there, surrounded by people, I felt alone. Everyone else seemed so put together, while I was just trying to piece my life back together. I wanted to move on, to feel normal again, but it felt impossible. Every time I took a step forward, I'd feel the weight of the past dragging me back. I tried to convince myself that it was just going to take time, that I had to be patient with myself, but it was hard. I'd wake up some mornings and just feel like I was going through the motions, like nothing mattered. I knew I needed to find a way to truly let go, but I just didn't know how yet. All I could do was keep trying, keep putting one foot in front of the other, hoping that someday it wouldn't feel so heavy. It took a while before I finally let myself reach out to friends and family. I had spent so long isolating myself, trying to deal with everything alone, but I was hitting a wall. One day, my best friend Jeff called again, and I don't know what changed, but I finally answered. He didn't ask too many questions or push me to talk about Melissa. He just said, "Hey man, let's get a coffee." It was something so simple, but it felt like a lifeline. I agreed, and when we met up, it was like a weight started to lift, even just a little. Jeff didn't pry. He let me open up at my own pace. We talked about everything and nothing, work, sports, and eventually what had happened with Melissa. He listened without judgment, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't carrying all of it alone. He told me that it was okay to feel lost, that I didn't have to have all the answers right now. Hearing that made a difference. I didn't realize just how much I needed to hear someone say that I was allowed to not be okay. I also reached out to my mom. I had been avoiding her calls because I knew she'd worry, and I didn't want her to see me like this. But when I finally sat down with her, I could see how much she cared. and I realized I was hurting her by shutting her out. She just hugged me, and I couldn't help but break down. I told her everything, all the things I had kept bottled up, my fears, my failures, how I felt like I wasn't enough. She listened, and she reminded me of who I used to be, who I still could be. She told me that I was stronger than I thought, and that this wasn't the end of my story. It was just a terrible chapter. Slowly, I started letting other people in too. Friends who I hadn't seen in months reached out, and I started saying yes when they invited me out. At first, it felt awkward, like I was pretending to be okay. But eventually, being around people who cared about me helped. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I still had people who loved me. It didn't make everything better overnight, but it made the days a little less heavy. I realized that the more I let people in, the easier it was to take each step forward. I didn't have to carry all of it on my own, and that made all the difference. After opening up to my friends and family, I finally felt like I could start to breathe again. It wasn't an instant change, but I began taking small steps toward healing. I decided I needed to do something for myself, something that didn't involve just getting through the day. So I picked up running. I hadn't done it in years, but I remembered how it used to clear my head. At first, it was tough. I was out of shape, and it felt like my body was as tired as my mind. But each morning, I pushed myself a little further. Running gave me something to focus on, a way to release the tension that had been building up for so long. I also started cooking for myself again. Melissa used to do most of the cooking, and after she left, I had lost interest. But I realized that eating frozen dinners night after night wasn't helping me feel any better. So, I went to the grocery store, picked up some fresh ingredients, and decided I'd make myself a decent meal. It was just a simple pasta dish, nothing fancy, but it felt like an accomplishment, like I was taking back control of my life, one small piece at a time. There were still difficult days, of course. Days when I'd wake up feeling like the weight of everything was too much. But on those days, I'd remind myself that I didn't have to be perfect, that just getting up and trying was enough. I'd go for a run, or call Jeff, or visit my mum, and slowly, those little things began to make a difference. I started writing in a journal too, just to get my thoughts out of my head and onto paper. It helped me sort through the mess, to see the progress I was making, even if it was just in tiny steps. I think what I realized was that healing wasn't about some big breakthrough moment. It was about the little choices I made every day, the choice to get out of bed, to take care of myself, to keep moving forward even when it felt like I was getting nowhere. I learned to celebrate those small victories, like making it through a tough day without breaking down, or actually enjoying a meal I cooked for myself. Those moments mattered, and they slowly started adding up. And day by day, I began to feel a little more like myself again. I wasn't healed, not by a long shot, but I was getting there, one small step at a time. One day, Jeff called me up out of the blue. He told me he had an extra ticket to a baseball game that weekend and insisted I come along. I wasn't really in the mood for crowds or noise, and the idea of being around so many happy, carefree people felt overwhelming. But Jeff wasn't taking no for an answer. He said, "Come on, you need this. Just a few hours to relax and have some fun." I realized he was right. I needed to do something that wasn't just about getting through the day. I needed to let myself enjoy something, even if it was just for a few hours. I agreed to go, not really knowing what to expect, but figuring it was better than spending another night alone, lost in my thoughts. Jeff picked me up that Saturday, and on the way to the stadium, he kept things light, joking around like we used to. For the first time in what felt like forever, I found myself smiling, even laughing a little. It felt strange but good, like maybe I could actually have a moment where I didn't feel weighed down by everything. When we got to the stadium, the energy was infectious. People were cheering, laughing, and for a moment, I felt like I was part of something bigger, like I wasn't just alone in my own little bubble of pain. I didn't know it yet, but that baseball game would turn out to be a turning point for me. It was the start of something new, something I hadn't even realized I was ready for. When we got to our seats at the game, I tried to just take it all in. The noise, the energy, the crowd. Jeff was completely into it, cheering and yelling, and I found myself getting caught up in the atmosphere. I wasn't really paying much attention to the people around us until I heard someone laughing a few seats away. It was this genuine, contagious kind of laugh that cut through all the noise, and I couldn't help but turn to see who it was. There she was. Anna. She was sitting a couple of seats down, wearing a baseball cap and holding a hot dog, laughing at something her friend said. There was something so carefree about her that it caught my attention. I don't know why, but I kept stealing glances at her. She must have noticed because at one point she looked over and caught my eye. I quickly looked away, but then she smiled at me. It was one of those warm, open smiles that made it impossible not to smile back. A little while later, during one of the breaks in the game, she leaned over and said something about the pitcher. I can't even remember exactly what she said, but it made me laugh. And just like that, we started talking. It was easy, easier than I thought it could be, considering everything I'd been through. We talked about the game, about how she didn't know much about baseball, but loved the atmosphere anyway. I found myself opening up too, telling her that I was just there because my friend dragged me along, which made her laugh again. There was something about Anna that made me feel comfortable, like I could just be myself, without all the weight I'd been carrying. We kept talking, and by the end of the game, I realized I hadn't thought about Melissa even once. It was like, for those few hours, I was just David, not the guy who'd been betrayed or the one trying to piece his life back together, but just me. Before we left, I gathered the courage to ask for her number. I was nervous, half expecting her to say no, but she smiled and handed me her phone. I saved my number, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful, like maybe this was the start of something new. After meeting Anna at the game, I was hopeful, but I was also scared. Trust wasn't something that came easily anymore, not after everything that had happened with Melissa. I wanted to see Anna again, but part of me kept holding back, afraid of getting hurt. I couldn't help but wonder if I'd ever be able to fully trust someone again. Still, I decided to take a chance. I called her, and we made plans to meet up for coffee. It was a small step, but it felt huge to me. Our first coffee date was casual, but it felt different from anything I'd experienced since the breakup. Anna was open and honest, and there was no pressure. She wasn't trying to pry into my past, and she wasn't rushing anything. She just wanted to get to know me, and I found myself wanting to get to know her too. I was honest with her, told her that I'd been through a lot, and that I wasn't sure how ready I was for anything serious. She smiled and said she understood, that she wasn't in a rush either. That meant everything to me. We started seeing each other more often. Coffee, walks in the park, a few more baseball games. With every meeting, I found myself letting my guard down, little by little. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I'd catch myself overthinking, worrying about whether I was setting myself up for more heartbreak. But Anna was patient. She never pushed me to move faster than I was ready for, and that made all the difference. Her kindness and understanding started to chip away at the walls I'd built around myself. Slowly, I began to trust again. It wasn't some grand moment. It was in the little things, like when she'd call just to ask how my day was, or when she'd show up with my favorite coffee just because. Those moments showed me that she was different, that maybe I could believe in love again. It wasn't perfect, and I still had my moments of doubt, but I was starting to realize that taking the risk was worth it. With Anna, I felt like I could have something real again, and that was more than I'd ever hoped for after everything that had happened. As time went on, something shifted in me. The more I got to know Anna, the more I realized that I wasn't just healing. I was genuinely happy again. It was a kind of happiness I hadn't felt in a long time. A simple joy that came from being with someone who accepted me for who I was, flaws and all. I hadn't planned on falling for her, not after everything I'd been through, but it happened slowly, almost without me noticing. It was in the way she laughed, in the way she listened, in how she made me feel like I mattered. I remember one day, we were sitting in the park, just watching the people go by, and Anna turned to me and said, "You know, you seem lighter these days." And she was right. I did feel lighter. I wasn't carrying around the same weight of betrayal and loss anymore. I had let go of the pain I'd been holding on to, and in its place was something new, something good. With Anna, I didn't have to pretend to be okay. I could just be myself, and that was enough. She never judged me for my past, never made me feel like I had to be anything other than who I was. We'd have these moments, small, ordinary moments, that felt extraordinary because of how they made me feel. Like cooking dinner together, laughing as we made a mess of the kitchen, or going for a walk and ending up talking for hours about everything and nothing. It was in those moments that I realized I loved her. It wasn't the kind of love that swept me off my feet all at once. It was the kind that grew steadily, like a warmth that spread slowly until it filled every part of me. For the first time since Melissa, I believed in love again. And it wasn't because Anna fixed me. She didn't. She just gave me the space and the support I needed to heal. And in that space, I found myself again. I found the part of me that wanted to love and be loved. And I found it with her. It wasn't perfect, and I knew there would still be challenges, but I also knew that with Anna, I had found something real. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the future. I was ready for whatever came next, and I knew that with her by my side, I could face anything. Looking back now, it's strange to think about how much has changed. When Melissa left, I thought that was it for me, that I'd never be able to trust, to love, or even to feel happy again. The pain was so overwhelming that it was hard to imagine life beyond it. But now, as I sit here with Anna, with her laughter filling the room and her warmth beside me, I can see that everything I went through led me to this point. It doesn't mean the pain wasn't real or that what Melissa did didn't hurt. It did, more than anything else I've ever faced. But that pain became part of my journey, and somehow it brought me here. I think I've come to realize that life is full of moments like that, moments that break us, moments that challenge everything we believe. It's what we do with those moments that defines us. I could have stayed angry, bitter, and closed off. There were times I wanted to, times when the anger felt like the only thing keeping me afloat. But instead, I chose to let it go, little by little. I chose to believe that there was still good in the world, that there were still people who would love me for who I am. Being with Anna showed me that happiness isn't about pretending everything is perfect. It's about finding someone who accepts your scars, who sees the broken pieces and loves you anyway. It's about finding joy in the small, everyday moments and realizing that those moments are what make life beautiful. I found that with Anna, and I found that within myself too. I'm not the same person I was before, and I'm okay with that. I'm stronger now, and I know that whatever happens, I can face it, because I've already faced the worst and come out the other side. The pain I went through wasn't something I would ever wish on anyone, but it brought me to where I am now. It taught me to value the people who stand by me, to cherish the love I have, and to trust that even when things fall apart, there's still hope. There's still a chance to find happiness again, to rebuild, and to start over. I've learned that sometimes the endings we fear are just the beginning of something we never saw coming, something even better. And for that, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the journey, the lessons, and for the love I've found along the way.